Okay, I'm halfway down 201. Chloe drove the Hope Chest carefully along Broadway and then up 6th Avenue, braking to let people pass. The city seemed to be getting more crowded every minute. Not everyone had yellow or red symbols to show that they were suffs or antis. There were a lot of tourists who had just come to watch the battle. Chloe stopped to let a woman pushing a high-backed wicker wheelchair cross the street. In the wheelchair was a young man whose legs ended at the knee, who Violet guessed from his age might have been a soldier. The woman looked like she might be his mother. "I wish you hadn't left Stephen alone like that," Chloe said. "You wish I hadn't?" Violet was stung by the unfairness of this. "I didn't leave him alone. I left him with Mother and Father." "Yes, but being with Mother and Father can be a bit like being alone, you know." "Yes, I do know, as a matter of fact," Violet said, folding her arms. "Violet, you don't think I abandoned you, do you? Father threw me out." "No, he didn't," Violet argued. "He told you never to darken his door again when you bought the Hope Chest, but you'd already moved out by then." "Yes." Chloe stopped again. A yellow dog was wandering across the road ahead of them. "I had to leave, Violet." "So did I," said Violet. "Anyway, it's not like Stephen really notices who's around him." "I think he does," said Chloe. Then Violet remembered that Chloe had studied to be a nurse since leaving home. "Do people with shell shock ever get better?" "Some do," said Chloe. "It takes time, and it may be that they all do. It's a fairly new disease. We don't know much about it." Ding! The engine gave a loud pow and stopped running. "Now we're stalled. Violet, could you crank?" Violet got out, went to the front of the car, and inserted the metal crank that turned the starter. She cranked until the car coughed, spat smoke, and started. Then she got back in the passenger seat next to Chloe. They chugged on. "So what causes it then?" Violet said. "Well, some doctors believe it's caused by low air pressure in areas where a lot of shells have been fired." "Not by—" Violet searched for the word. "Cowardice?" said Chloe bluntly. "No, why should it be? After all, shell shock is a new disease, and cowardice is as old as humanity." Violet thought about this. It did make sense. That was one of the nice things about Chloe. She was always so sensible. Then Chloe ruined it by saying, "Violet, even if Stephen was frightened, why shouldn't he be? Surrounded by bombs and bullets and enemy soldiers?" Violet made no reply. She liked the low air pressure explanation better. The street in front of the Capitol was full of Model Ts, parked diagonally on both sides. Chloe slid the Hope Chest into an empty space, and they got out. Violet remembered her red rose and pulled it off, sticking it inside her hat in case she needed it later. "Doesn't it matter, us going into the Capitol together when I'm pretending to be an anti?" she asked. "I don't think anyone's paying attention at this point," said Chloe with a tired smile. "Both sides are panicking, just trying to figure out which side the legislators are on and when the vote is going to happen. There are some Tennessee suffs up here guarding the special House committee. That's supposed to meet on the amendment tonight." Chloe nodded up at the Capitol. "What's the committee meeting supposed to do?" Violet asked as they climbed up the 72 stone steps toward the Capitol. Violet had heard that a Model T Ford had climbed these steps a few years ago to prove the superiority of automobiles to horse-drawn carriages. Violet wondered if Chloe would be willing to try driving the Hope Chest up these steps. She looked at Chloe's exhausted face and decided now was not the time to suggest it. A committee's job is to look at a bill and decide whether or not to send it to the floor to be voted on by the legislator, Chloe said, sounding weary. In this case, it's a bill saying that Tennessee ratifies the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. She stopped to rest, leaning against the pedestal of a statue. A week ago, we had a clear majority. Nearly 2/3 of the House members said they favored the bill. But thanks to the antis and their businessmen and mystery men, it now looks like the committee might not even vote to send the bill to the floor. "And if it does get sent to the floor," said Violet, moving around to see if there was any shade anywhere, "then it needs a 3/4 vote to pass?" "3/4? No, only a majority. More than half the House, that's all it needs." "In school we learned—" Violet frowned, trying to remember. It hadn't seemed nearly as important when they learned it in school as they did now. A constitutional amendment requires a 2/3 vote of Congress and 3/4 of the state legislatures. That means the legislatures of 3/4 of the states, said Chloe. In other words, 36 of the 48 states. And we've got 35.5 now. But we don't need the Tennessee House itself to vote 3/4 in favor. All we need is a simple majority, and we're so close. She looked up at the old cannons that surrounded the Capitol, left over from the Civil War. Capitals are built on hills so they can be protected if the people revolt, said Chloe, looking up at the cannons and smiling. Violet guessed from the smile that Chloe had probably heard this from Mr. Martin. Why are women antis even bothering? Violet asked. This had been on her mind for the last several days. If they're that much against voting, why don't they just not vote when they get the right? Some people are never satisfied unless they're making choices for other people, said Chloe. And of course, a lot of the antis are funded by big business and by the political machines. Politics in this country is very corrupt, you know, Violet. Most elections are bought and sold. People sell their votes, and political machines in each city and state organize the purchase of votes. Violet nodded, too out of breath from the heat and climbing to bother replying. The corrupt bosses don't want women to mess things up, Chloe went on. They've spent over a century building up the vote-buying system they've got now, and everything is so fine-tuned. If 27 million voters are suddenly added to the rolls for November election, it will destroy all their calculations. Violet moved around the statue again, still trying to find a spot of shade. Who is this fella? Chloe squinted up at the statue. Edward Ward Carmack. He was a newspaper editor who was gunned down in the streets of Nashville a few years ago. His murderers were pardoned by the governor, not the governor they have now. Pardoned by the governor? Violet tried to look up at the statue silhouetted against the blazing white sun, but couldn't. They shot him down in the street in cold blood, and they were pardoned by the governor? Well, I don't know if it was cold blood, said Chloe, patting the pedestal, but Mr. Carmack might have drawn first. But in his newspaper he'd criticized the men who shot him, and he'd also criticized Governor Patterson. He was against the liquor interests, Mr. Carmack was, and Patterson was for them. Governor Patterson pardoned the killers before they'd spent a day in jail. So the governor of a state can have people he doesn't like killed, Violet said. Nothing she had learned about government in school had suggested this. Oh, I doubt it was quite like that, Chloe said. Come on. Okay, I'm going to stop there at the top of 207.